What a year's zoomed by. So much has happened since we were last here. As already been mentioned by Brother Roger, two great earthquakes, Brexit and Trump, and they have the potential to make tremendous changes in the world in the way that we expect from Bible prophecy things are going to go. Both Mrs. May and Mr. Trump are favourable towards Israel, and at last Israel has a friend. And we've seen how Russia has been digging herself in, surrounding Turkey, and not only surrounding Turkey, but as we shall see, has been surrounding Europe by putting in bases in many parts of the world. We've seen the Pope meeting the Patriarch, ending a long, long 1,000-year separation between the Russian and the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. And they're beginning to come together. And we know at the time of the end, when Daniel's image stands upon its feet, it has a head of gold, a Babylonian head. And the origins of both those churches lie in Babylon. And they have to work together at the time of the end. And we're seeing how they're beginning to come together. They have common interests to defend Christians around the world. And that may play a significant role with them coming down against Israel. And we look at Europe, a very significant day. You chose to have the Kent Prophecy Day on the 60th anniversary of the founding of what is the EU. And as Brother Simeon has said, Brother Roger said, the leaders have met today in Rome to celebrate without Mrs. May being there. So these are some of the faces of the people who play an important role, that God has put them into position, men that he has chosen. We might not appreciate their outlook and the things that they say, but we have to bear in mind that God has put these men into position because he knows that they will play the role that he has in his mind. And we're going to spend most of our time looking at Mr. Putin and the things of Russia, and just ending with looking at a few things about Israel. So we've seen an amazing change in the balance in the political world around us. And we know that the next great event is the return of the Lord Jesus to his household, prior to the nations coming against Israel. And then the next greatest event after that is the salvation of Israel from the hands of their enemies. And we see the world moving towards that end of the nations coming against Israel. Well, this is a significant edition for Milestones. It is the 40th edition. My father started it way back in 1977. And I've been involved for 25 years. I never thought that, here we will still be 25 years later, but we've seen so much that has happened which confirms, strengthens our understanding of Bible prophecy. It has been a wonderful era. Now we know from Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar's image stands upon its feet, it has strange feet. A mixture of iron and a mixture of clay. And this is what we're seeing being formed today. All the other elements have been formed, as it were, in their time and laid aside. We've now come to the time when the whole lot are going to be assembled together because the feet have been formed. So what we are seeing is this formation, the dragging of the nations into the appropriate foot, the eastern foot and the western foot. And so much of what is happening in Europe today is part of this movement of the nations. And then it stands upon its feet for a brief period. And it's clear that there must be a connection between the past, when the legs were there, one in Rome and the other in Constantinople. There must be a connection between those two legs and the feet that have to be formed. And that's what we will be looking at. So we need to have a look at some history to begin with. And the situation that we find is that Rome, the power of Rome, is at the basis of what is happening today. We might not appreciate it, but when we look at Russia and the development of Russia, we're looking at an extension of the Roman Empire. And what we're looking for is for Russia to come down into Constantinople and to occupy Constantinople, that it might be that great power that Daniel spoke of so long ago. And we need to know the background to the history of how Russia came to be known as the Third Rome. We know that when Constantine conquered the Roman Empire and became emperor, he moved the centre of his government over to Constantinople. It was known as Byzantium. And Byzantium was renamed and modelled upon Rome and called Constantinople after Constantine. It's now called Istanbul. But that movement to Constantinople established a second Rome. And it was known as the Second Rome because it was modelled upon the First Rome. And this movement of the seat of government eastward enabled the old Rome to develop, the papacy to develop, and eventually the Holy Roman Empire. So we had the two halves, the western half and the eastern half of the Roman Empire developing. Now, Constantinople flourished, the Byzantine Empire, as it was known, flourished until 1453, when the Ottoman Turks came and destroyed Constantinople. And at that stage, when Constantinople was destroyed, the things that were associated with Constantinople were moved to Moscow. And Moscow was known as the Third Rome. Because again, Moscow modelled itself upon Constantinople. Many of the buildings there have a reflection. And the imperial eagle and many symbols of the Roman Empire were taken to Moscow. And Russia became the Third Rome. And the Eastern Roman world, Constantinople, was the centre of the military power of Rome. And so we see Russia has taken up that mantle. It is the military power, and it will be a great power in the future. So the final stage of the drying up of the river Euphrates, which we look at 1917, the First World War, when Turkey's power was dried up, enabling Israel to come back and be established as a nation, that drying up hasn't yet finished. That drying up finishes when Turkey no longer has control of Constantinople, when Russia moves back, and this is what we are looking to, that Russia must move and must occupy Constantinople so that we have a Constantinopolitan leg and we have a Roman leg in the west, an eastern leg and a western leg. So Daniel in chapter 8 makes it clear that the power which eventually became the Roman power was to exist at the time of the end. And towards the end of Daniel chapter 8, which has described the growth of Rome springing out of the Greek Empire and the standing up against the Prince of Princes, Roman power put Jesus to death, at the end of the chapter it tells us that that power is still in existence. And the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors come to the full, a king of fierce countenance, understanding dark sentences, shall stand up. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. And through his policy he shall also cause craft to prosper in his hand. And he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many, He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, which Brother Simeon was taking us to at the end of Daniel. But he shall be broken without hand. Again, the language of Daniel chapter 11. So it's clear that this power, which was a Roman power, exists at the time of the end, comes against the Prince of Princes, but is destroyed. And so we look to Russia as being that extension of the Roman power and will reinstate itself in Constantinople. That's why Russia is so interested in Turkey. So we must remember, when we think of Russia, to remember the Roman connection. So if we come back to those last elements of Nebuchadnezzar's image, the feet and toes, the last elements to be formed, we know that the eastern leg belongs to Russia, and in the time of the Roman Empire, that was the portion of Europe that belonged to the east, and that was the portion of Europe that belonged to the west. Now, we look to a much bigger area than that to come under the influence of the two legs. But just where the dividing line between the eastern leg and the western leg lies, we can't be 100% sure. But it seems reasonable to extend the line northward. And so that would tell us that there are various countries which are attached to the west, which have got to be broken away and attached to the east, to Russia. So the start of the forming of the feet and toes, we can really go back 60 years to the founding of the European Coal and Steel, which was the EEU, which became the EU. And as has already been said, today is the 60th birthday of when they sat in that room and signed this treaty. And they visited the Pope and then signed the treaty. And this room where they signed it is full of significance. Nothing the EU does is done without significance. This room was particularly chosen to be the site where the signing should take place. When it is empty, then there is the room. It's the hall that is known as the Hall of the Hierarchy and Curiati. And these two, the Hierarchy and the Curiati, I didn't know until I was looking it up last night. But way back in ancient Rome, there was a battle between Rome and a neighbouring city. And they decided not to involve big armies, but a bit like David and Goliath. The Romans supplied 3 triplets, and the other city supplied 3 triplets, and these 6 men battled it out. And we haven't time to look at it, but just Google Hierarchy, and it'll tell you in Wikipedia all about it. But it was a typical divide and conquer, and Rome was victorious. And, you know, as I read it, I thought, this is the EU through and through, divide and conquer. And, of course, at one end is a pope, Innocent X at one end, and the other end of the room, which you can't see, is Pope Urban VIII. And both those popes were involved in historic times in reviving the welfare of Rome at a time of great difficulty. Both of them were instrumental in putting Rome back on their feet. So again, you know, the papacy has backed the EU because it wants power. And, you know, what more significant room to meet than this particular room? And again, today, this is where they have met, in this same room. So, let's look at how the nations are being moved into their appropriate foot. So as I say, we know that the feet and toes must be attached to legs which had a significance in the past, pointing to Rome and Constantinople. So there are quite a few nations, as you can see from the colours there, that belong to the EU and we would say are in the wrong leg. And there was countries like Belarus, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Crete, Cyprus and Turkey all need to become part of the eastern leg. And this is just exactly what we see, that these countries are being pulled towards Russia. And there was an interesting article in Stratfor on 28th of February. It was talking about Europe's borderlands, these countries which are at the borders, the meeting point between the EU and Russia. In Europe's borderlands, the wind of change blow in every direction. This is rumbling the geopolitical tectonic plates of the borderlands, with a dearth of geographical barriers separating them from Western Europe and Russia. The borderlands have always been susceptible to competing influences from both Moscow and the West. Each of the borderland countries, which include the Baltic states, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and the countries of the Caucasus, is reacting to the shifting geopolitical circumstances differently. Some are choosing to pursue closer ties to Russia, others are doubling down on their bets on Western integration, and still others are attempting to walk a tightrope between Moscow and the West. So this was acknowledging that there are countries on the borders which are finding it difficult to maintain their link to the West and are being drawn to the East, and that's exactly what we see. So Romania and Bulgaria. Bulgaria is the most unhappy EU member. She thought this was going to be the answer to everything to join the EU, but she has found that it hasn't proved to be beneficial at all. And lots of the Romanians are leaving their country and going to other countries because they're finding life in the EU very difficult. And more they're being attracted to Russia. And Russia is working behind the scenes. We know all the problems that there are, the allegations that are being made that Russia interfered with the American elections. We know that Russia has been working in many of these countries to try and pull them towards herself. Mind you, the EU does exactly the same thing. Very often it's the pot calling the kettle black. The EU pours money into these countries to try and draw them towards the EU. So there's this constant battle going on between the two countries. If we think of Greece, Greece has been a member of the EU for a long time, but she's an odd one out because she is an Orthodox country. Most of the EU countries are Roman Catholic, so she is an odd one out. And she has exceeding great woes in the euro. Unemployment is running very high. At one stage, it was nearly 27% of all Greeks were unemployed. It has got a bit better, but it's still running at 20%. So that's an awful burden. And when you look at youth unemployment, it did reach 51%. It's slightly better at 45%, but there's a whole generation of young people who never had any employment. And things are getting worse. This was a comment in The Guardian on the 19th of February. From bad to worse, Greece hurtling towards a final reckoning. Wasn't even a question mark there, just a statement. The country's epic struggle to avert bankruptcy should have been settled when Athens received 110 billion euros in aid, which was the biggest financial programme in global history from the EU and the IMF in May 2010. And now they've had 3 more bailouts, and they're still wrangling over the terms of the latest bailout. And diplomats are no longer talking of a can, but rather a bomb being kicked down the road. Default looms if they don't repay part of the debt in July. Amid the uncertainty, volatility has returned to the markets, with an estimated 2.2 billion euros being withdrawn from the banks by panic-stricken depositors since the beginning of the year, with talk of Greece's exit from the euro being heard again. Farmers, trade unions and other sectors enraged by the eviscerating effects of austerity have once more come out in protest. And IMF are saying we're not going to give you any more money, and Germany, who has given the most money, saying we're not going to give any more money if the IMF don't. So we can see the pressures there upon this country. It'll be forced to leave the euro. Who's going to pick up the pieces? Well, the cartoonists can see it, and Bible students can see it. Putin is waiting in the wings, ready to receive Greece when she gets kicked out of the euro. Here's another one. The EU chap, big and bloated, is walking off and not giving any money to Greece, and there's Putin saying, "Oh, I'll look after you." Here's yet another one. Now, Putin has been preparing the ground. He visited Greece last year. This was an article which he wrote, which appeared in the Greek newspaper in May 2016. And he lays down his terms of agreement, as it were. Ahead of my visit to Athens, I would like to share some ideas regarding the further developments of the partnership between Greece and Russia, as well as about the situation on the European continent in general. We value the centuries-old tradition of friendship between our peoples. Our cooperation rests on a rock-solid base of common civilizational values. This was written in Russian, translated into Greek and then into English, so it's a bit stulted at times. The orthodox culture and a genuine mutual affection. And there is a great link between Greece and Russia, because from Greece, from Constantinople, came their religion. And this has a tremendous bearing on the relationship that Russia wants to have with Greece. You know, this is where our religion came from. We want to be your friends. Today, Russia and the European Union have come to a crossroads. How do we see the future of our relations, and which way are we going to head? I'm convinced that we should draw appropriate conclusions from the events in Ukraine and proceed to establish, in the vast space stretching between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, a zone of economic and humanitarian cooperation based on the architecture of equal and indivisible security. Harmonising European and Eurasian integration processes will be an important step in this direction. He said, come on, let's do trade together. Let's work together. Let Russia and Europe work together. This will settle a lot of our problems. So as far as Greece is concerned, it's work in progress. Russia will pick up the pieces when Greece falls, and Greece will be drawn into the eastern foot. So what of Turkey? Well, it's been a very difficult year for relations between Turkey and Russia, largely as a result of the ambitions of President Erdogan, who wants Turkey to be the main Muslim power in the region. And that, of course, treads on the toes of what Russia is wanting to do, and what Syria is wanting to do, and what Iran is wanting to do. So a lot of conflict there. And, of course, the friendship between Turkey and Russia, which was very strong, was severely dented when the Turks shot down a Russian aircraft back in November 2015. Russia imposed strong sanctions on Turkey, forbade Russians to go and holiday in Turkey, really dented their economy. And it wasn't until last June that President Erdogan sent a letter apologising for the shooting down of the plane, followed that up with a phone call, and they met, and now they have been meeting and talking to each other. And Putin invited him to come to Russia, and they met in the Constantine Palace. It was named after the Grand Duke Constantine Nikolaevich, who was the 19th century son of Tsar Nicholas. But obviously he was named after Constantine the Great. So Putin chose to have the meeting between this Muslim Turk and himself in the Greek room, full of symbols. The double-headed eagle was on abundant show, to say to this man, we're interested in Turkey because of its Greek connections. I'm sure the message wasn't lost on the president of Turkey. Things had a potential to all unravel again when the Russian ambassador to Turkey was shot dead on the 19th of December last year, but Putin saw the wisdom of not making a big issue of it, and things have remained the same. He is using carrots and sticks. He knows eventually he's going to take control of Turkey, but he wants to do it in a way that doesn't upset people. And Turkey is very heavily dependent upon Russia for her energy. And Putin is increasing that because everything is now signed up. In fact, work has started on this pipeline, which originally was going to go from there into Bulgaria and into the EU, but because of all the problems that the EU made, he said, well, I'm going to give up on the EU and I'm going to change the route and bring it down into the industrial area of Turkey and right up to the borders of Greece, in preparation for when Greece falls into his hands, so they'll not be reliant upon the EU for gas, but reliant upon Russia for gas. So that is now proceeding, take a few years to build. But Russia and Turkey are working together. In fact, this is an article towards the end of February. Turkey is proposing, and remember, Turkey is a member of NATO, biggest army, NATO army. But she's wanting to install Russian military equipment. She's wanting to put in the S-400 air missile defence system, which would go counter to the NATO principles. Because if Turkey does that, then NATO will have to say to Turkey, well, if you go down that route, then we can't share information with you. Because if you're going down the Russian arm, you can't be part of the NATO arm. So it's significant that he sees his future doesn't lie with the West. It lies with Russia. So we see this gradual moving of Turkey into the arms of Russia. No doubt there will come a time when Russian boots will march and occupy Turkey. Whether that takes place prior to the invasion of Israel or whether it is part of the coming down of Russia into the Middle East, into Israel, into Egypt, we don't know. All we do know is that in order for prophecy to be fulfilled, Russia must be in occupation of Constantinople at the time of the end. So Russia is working in different ways to influence these areas. And the little country of Montenegro, which is right on the borderline between east and west part of the Balkans, and Montenegro wants to become part of NATO and wants to become part of the EU. Now, Russia is resisting that, and in fact last autumn time, but it only came out very recently, that Russia sent undercover agents into this little tiny country to try and assassinate the leader of the country who was trying to pull the country towards the west. One of the plotters was turned and revealed the plot, and it was all squashed. But it just shows the efforts that Russia is making behind the scenes to try and influence things. If necessary, it means taking somebody, eliminating them in order to get things changed. Now, I don't expect it to become part of Russia. I think it probably does belong to the West, but it was just an interesting aspect. And the Sunday Telegraph at the time when these things were revealed, the plot is seen as one of the latest aggressive attempts by Russia to undermine the West, and was hatched at the same time Moscow was accused of trying to sway the US elections. So it is acknowledged how Russia is trying to use her influence to move these states across into her influence. So let's just look at the Ukraine. Just before we do, to the west of Ukraine is a little country, Transnistria. Let's put it on the bigger map there. It's just a little slither of country, which was part of Moldova, but when in the 1990s, when the Soviet fell, there was a difference of opinion between the people that lived in that little strip. They were very pro-Russian. Moldova, well, wanted to be independent of Russia, and so they split, and Transnistria became independent. And Putin has made sure that there is a Russian influence there. He's enlarged the air base there to take these big transporter planes. And this is an important base because it's right on the Ukrainian borders. But what has been interesting, just in the past few months, is that there has been a change in Moldova. No longer are they pro-West. There's been a new election, and a surprise person won the election who is pro-Russian. And so there is now talk that perhaps these Moldova and this little breakaway section will come back together. Anyway, Putin is now very pleased that Moldova is favourable to Russia and is again putting in troops in Moldova in order that she's got troops that, if the time comes to take Ukraine, well, she has got troops to the east as well as to the west. So this is Reuters on the Moldovan president says he may scrap the EU trade pact. The chap's gone to visit Russia in January, speaking in Moscow at a news conference with the Russian Putin. He said that it was curious that Moldova's trade turnover with the EU had wilted since signing a political and trade pact with the bloc in 2014. We gained nothing from this agreement, he told reporters. So there again was a country which thought by turning to the West that things would get better, and they found to their cost that things haven't got better. So they're now looking back at linking back up with Russia. So we've got these on the western side. Russia has strengthened a base last year to the north of Ukraine, and again earlier in the year there was another base which, these are both existing bases, but they're now being enlarged, modernised, better runways, so that it's beginning to surround Ukraine. We know in the breakaway area that there are a lot of Russian troops in there, and the people in this region, which is the main area of Ukraine for industry, this is where their coal and their steel is. Ukraine is really suffering because of this particular area has linked itself to Russia. It's only a small area. You look at the map there, but it is a very important area to Ukraine. And of course, in Crimea, Putin has been strengthening his position there. And Reuters sent a reporter there, and he wrote this report in November last year. And he made this comment that Crimea sits at the southern end of a line of new and refurbished Russian military facilities that stretches north in an arc through western Russia and ends in the country's Baltic outpost of Kaliningrad. Now, in his travels, he spent a whole week, this reporter, going around Crimea, and he noted 18 sites where the Russians had renovated or built entirely new facilities. This particular base here at Foytsia has got a big radar facility which can keep a watch on NATO forces in Bulgaria and Romania and Turkey. There's another base at Dnieper down in the south there, which again with its radar watches the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. And then dotted around these various bases, so some of them with huge hangars, accommodate a lot of troops, military equipment, military vehicles, and at Sebastopol, the port, greatly enlarged, so the main fleet is stationed here. This is Putin's forward base. This is his preparation for taking over the Middle East, which is his aim. And this is where he's consolidating his forces, and from here they can move forward, and we have seen how they have moved forward. Now, it's been very difficult for the people on Crimea because there is only one land link, and that goes into Ukraine. So the Russians, there is another bridge, several bridges over the water, but again, that leads from Ukraine. So what Russia has been busy doing is building a bridge which will bridge between the Kerch Straits from mainland Russia here across there. It is being built. It's scheduled for completion in 2020. It's not an easy bridge. It's not terribly wide, but it's a very fast-flowing water and is a main shipping route from all the countries high north. But they are proceeding with that. So we see, let's just put the bases that we've already put on, let's just click those on. So down in Georgia, we know that in 2008 Russians moved in and 2 breakaway regions were set up where Russia has her influence. What she is busy doing at the moment is on the other side of the Caucasus Mountains here. Russia has a base, which again she is updating, which is in North Ossetia. North Ossetia is in Russia, South Ossetia is in Georgia. So there are only 2 main pathways which go across the mountains, one where South Ossetia is and the other where Updaqte is. And so Russia has control of both of those, so that when she wants to take Turkey, she can easily shift stuff through those passes and onwards and downwards into Turkey. That's the beginning of Turkey down there. So again, she's been building up her troops on the other side so that when they're needed, they can pour through. So what is also interesting, of course, Georgia was very upset in 2008 when all this happened. And Georgia set her eyes upon joining NATO and joining the West. And she's been rebuffed and things haven't happened. So she's now moved back to thinking she's got to link up with Russia. So this was Stratford, Georgia and Russia furthering ties with new trade routes. There are new signs that trade is beginning to tie Russia and Georgia closer together. So here's another state that wanted to be in a western foot, but being drawn by events back into an eastern foot. She has 3 bases in Belarus, up in the north there, and she also has this little tiny enclave, Kaliningrad, which is surrounded by Poland and Lithuania. And it is a very important foothold for her. It's only a little tiny area, and she has no direct access to it. Most things have to be flown into there. But it enables her to place weapons of war there, her missiles. And recently, she's moved some of the ships which have this caliber missile, which proved so effective in her warfare in Syria. She was able from the Caspian to fire missiles 900 miles across Iran and Iraq into Syria, and likewise from the Mediterranean to fire missiles from these ships. So by stationing ships there, it means that virtually the whole of Europe comes under the control of Russia as far as being able to knock out aircraft if she wants to. So it puts her in a very powerful position. So you can see this arc that the Crimean Reuters writer was talking about. Russia is not only ringing Europe, but she is also ringing round Turkey. Because again, last year she made an important agreement with Armenia, a military agreement. She has troops there, big base there. So that was another important foothold. So again, this was the Washington Times. Putin encircles Turkey in massive troop build-up. So Putin's plans in the Middle East are becoming clearer in a bid to exact revenge on Turkey and an attempt to split the NATO alliance. Russia is rapidly building up pressure on NATO's southern flank. Armenia is now hosting a massive Russian troop build-up with this. Putin is encircling Turkey in a classic pincer movement. So what he was doing in Cyprus, in Syria, was all part and parcel of this onward movement. He now sees the opportunity to put bases into various countries. He had a temporary base in Iran, and from there was able to fire missiles and send planes from there into Syria. And Iran has said, if you want to use that base again, you can do. But he has agreement to be able to use port facilities in Cyprus. He now has a large part of the Russian Navy stationed off the coast of Syria. He is reinforcing the bases on the coastline there, and he has 2 more further in Turkey. There are a lot of much smaller bases, but these are the main bases. The main air base is to the north of Updaqte, and the naval base at Tartus, which they've had for a number of years, is now rapidly being enlarged. But we'll just come back to those in a moment, because I just want to carry on just showing how Russia is encircling Europe. So we've seen the bases there. She is now getting drawn back into Libya. Now we know that Libya is part of those nations which are listed in Ezekiel 38. So it is incredible to see just how Scripture is coming back into things are happening according to Scripture. And Putin is getting very much involved and wants to have the facilities, the use of 2 facilities on 2 of the ports in Libya. The situation in Libya is very confusing. There is an eastern area there that's under the control of the Libyan National Army, which is led by this Field Marshal Haftar. The rest of the country, there's a government of national accord, which is the Prime Minister is this Mr. Farage. And between them, they seem to control most of the country. ISIS is trying to infiltrate and is causing problems for both these two men. But what was interesting was that when the Russian aircraft carrier, having finished its work off Syria, it called in at Libya, and Haftar, who has connections with Russia, has ties with the Soviet that go back to the 1970s, is very pro-Russian. He went onto the aircraft carrier. They put him in touch with the military leaders and with Putin on the communication system that they had. And in fact, last month he went to Russia, and what Russia is wanting from him is the use of facilities on these two ports which are under his control. So he hasn't got those yet, but this is what he's moving to. He's signed an oil agreement with Libya, and there is talk of a massive arms transfer, and that's what he'd gone to Russia to talk about. So it seems pretty clear that Putin will get his way and will get use of those facilities there. He's also made use of an old Soviet base in Egypt. The reports are that already Russia has got troops there. It's quite close to the border of Libya, and he's using it to support his friend just across in Libya to fight against ISIS and those that are threatening the stability of that region. So he's already got that base. And there is talk of having a base in Algeria. He's in talks with the Algerians, and is also with the Moroccans, which are just around the corner off the map. So you can see, how active he has been. This is the military power of Rome, the Roman eagle, encircling Europe and encircling Turkey. He is man on a mission to take control of this region. So back to these bases, Syria has given Putin 49-year leases on these two bases, no charge, free of charge, and automatic 25-year renewal at the end of the 49 years. So all the expenditure that Putin has put into defending Assad from ISIS has paid off. As this article from the US Naval Institute back in January put, Russia, Syria agree on Mediterranean naval base expansion and refit of Syrian ships. They've signed this agreement to expand Russia's sole foreign base into a larger naval base capable of permanently hosting 11 ships. At the moment can only hold 4. So this is a big enlargement. So they can have up to 11 ships there, which is more than enough. This agreement is an example of the rewards Russia is beginning to reap from having played a major role keeping the Syrian regime in power. And the planned upgrades will no doubt turn the base into an even more naval and military facility for Russia in the future. This is also the latest sign of Russia's intention to increase and project its presence in the region, commensurate with its efforts to expand its naval and military power. This is what their naval doctrine is. We want to rule the Mediterranean, and this is what we're seeing. So let's just summarise, or just a very brief look at Israel, but let's just summarise what we've seen. We've seen this huge expansion in the past few years of Russia's footprint with very little opposition from NATO, from America. She's just got on with the job and seized the opportunities that have arisen. And she's steadily moving further and further southward around the Mediterranean. She has Turkey encircled, and we can be sure that eventually Turkey will fall to Russia. It's very friendly with Iran, And these are all steps which Scripture would lead us to expect. It's so thrilling to see them happen now, at this time when major changes are going to take place with Brexit and the Trump earthquake. So let's just very briefly, just to put it to a close, because time's nearly gone, that Russia suddenly has friends. Instead of Obama being so anti-Israel, they now have in Trump a great friend. In Theresa May, they have a great friend. Many Commonwealth friends, India, Australia, Canada, all very friendly to Israel, wanting to do trade with her. She now has many friends in the southern Arab nations who see Israel as a great asset. She is their help against the threat of Iran, which is ever present to all these southern Arab nations. And at long last, the US ambassador to the UN, Lady Nikki Haley, has said she's no longer going to tolerate the anti-Israel drive of the United Nations. She's going to veto anything like that, so that is a great asset to her. Her economy is booming. She grew 4% last year. Revenue from the Tamar gas field is now coming in, and they're just beginning to start work on the Leviathan. They've invested a lot of money, and they've now just agreed to go to the next stage of actually drilling. So big expenditure, $3.75 billion, but they're expecting to get that money back in 3 years. So that's a great investment. And they hope to have gas flowing from 2019. And that will then mean she can export gas. She's already signed up to supply Jordan and Egypt with gas. It will be a great asset to her dealings with her neighbours, because they will become dependent on Israel as a source of supply for energy. Now, this was a startling article in an American magazine, American Interest, back in January. Israel, the eighth great power of 2017. The US remains the most powerful country on earth, followed by China, Japan, Russia, Germany, India, Iran, and Israel. A new name on our list of the eight greats. A small country, Israel is a rising power with a growing impact on world affairs. Overall, the Jewish state continues to develop diplomatic, economic, and military power and to insert itself into the heart of regional politics. Large offshore discoveries of natural gas and oil are turning Israel into an energy exporter. Energy self-sufficiency is a boost to Israel's economy. Energy exports boost Israel's foreign policy clout. Access to Israeli technology, like the technology behind the Iron Dome missile defence system, matters to more and more countries. Israel's diplomatic outreach to Africa and its deepening relationship with India benefit from Israel's ability to deliver what people in other countries want. Another factor is the change in the Middle Eastern balance of power that has transformed Israel from a pariah state to a kingmaker. Syria, one of Israel's most vociferous enemies and biggest security threats, has now been broken. Egypt hates Hamas, ISIS and the Islamic Jihad as much as Israel does. Never has Egyptian-Israeli security cooperation been as close as it is today. Even more consequentially, the rise of Iran and its aspirations to regional hegemony make Israel critical to the survival of the Sunni Arabs, including the Gulf states. Israel begins 2017 as the keystone of a regional anti-Iran alliance, a most favoured nation in the White House, and a country that enjoys good relations with all of the world's major powers, bar Iran. That's a remarkable turnaround, isn't it, brothers and sisters, in Israel? But sadly, it is an Israel who is doing all this and feeling very confident in herself. She has managed to protect herself from her enemies. She's been bold enough to go into Syria and knock out weapons that Iran has been supplying to Hezbollah. She did it last month, and there was another attack just last week, which took everybody by surprise, because Syria expects that Israel will deal with anything quite close to her border. But last week she went right into the heart of Syria, caught them all off guard, managed to destroy this weaponry and get back. And on her way back, they suddenly woke up and started to fire missiles. And these planes have been equipped with this new Arrow, which has only just come into service, and managed to intercept all these missiles that were fired at her. So Israel is feeling very confident that she has the technology to be able to withstand her enemies. It is thought that Iran was supplying game-changing weaponry into the hands of Hezbollah, and Israel got to hear of it and managed to wipe it out. But, brothers and sisters, it fits what the Bible tells us, not only in Ezekiel 38 and 39, but Isaiah chapter 2 and Isaiah chapter 10, that Israel is trusting in her own might. She's not trusting in her God, and she's got to be humbled. And that's why God is bringing the nations against her, in order to humble her, that she might turn to her God. And in the day when all her weaponry fails, then she will indeed be humbled and will cry out to her God to save her. And Christ and the saints will be all prepared to come and save them. But in Ezekiel 38, it uses this word of them dwelling safely. And the idea behind that word of safety is confidence, secure, trusting in their own might. And that's exactly the picture we see, brothers and sisters. Israel supremely confident in her ability to defend herself. And God says that that is a time of great trespass in his sight. So, one of the interesting things that are coming out of the talks between Trump and Netanyahu is that it's no good looking at the Palestinian-Israeli problem in isolation. One's got to look at the global situation. And what they're now talking about is Israel making a pact with her Arab neighbours, and then having made regional peace, then the Palestinian problem will drop into place. And again, that's something that, we've been looking for. We've been talking for a long time. Saying, Ezekiel 38 talks about this dwelling safely and securely. How can it possibly happen? Well, now we see the seedbed of it happening. There is the goodwill of America and Russia that there should be a peace in the region. Maybe we shall see this being developed. But as Ezekiel chapter 39 says, that in God's eyes, Israel is, in her confidence, in God's eyes, it is a time of trespass. Because Ezekiel 39 is now looking back. Israel has been delivered from their enemies. They've recognised their Messiah. And it's saying, at this time, I'm going to bring again the captivity, because a lot of them are going to be scattered into Jordan probably and into Greece. There's got to be another regathering of Israel back to their land. And that's going to happen, that final regathering of Israel is going to happen after that they have borne their shame and all their trespasses whereby they have trespassed against me, when they dwelt safely in their land and none made them afraid, because they were trusting in themselves. When I have brought them again from the people and delivered them again out of their enemies' hands, and am sanctified in them in the sight of many nations, then shall they, Israel, know that I am Yahweh their God, which caused them to be led into captivity among the heathen, but I've gathered them into their land. So this is speaking not of the gathering that we've seen at the moment, but this is speaking of the final gathering, when Israel, having been scattered, are drawn back to their land, in peace and safety. Now, this year we're in and next year are fascinating years as far as anniversaries are concerned. We're 170 years since Brother Thomas landed in England and started giving lectures, which form the basis of Help as Israel. 150 years from the first ship through the Suez Canal. Doesn't seem much, but we know how important the Suez Canal is to Britain, and that's why causing her to come to the east of Suez to protect the Suez. 120 years since the first Jewish Congress. 100 years from the Balfour Declaration and Allenby taking Jerusalem. 70 years since the UN approved a Jewish state and the State of Israel was established. 65 years since the coal and steel community came into force, which was the forerunner of the EU. That was before the 60-year anniversary, which I could have put in there, couldn't I? Retaking of Jerusalem 50 years ago. Sadat visiting Egypt, the beginning of the great change between Israel and Egypt 40 years ago. And the Soviets resuming diplomatic relations with Israel 25 years. So it's an important time period, brothers and sisters. And though we can't say that means that the Lord Jesus is definitely going to come back either this year or next year, it does tell us we are in the time of the end and we have to make preparation for that. So we live in exciting times and we look forward to that coming of our Lord Jesus. But under his mighty control, the nations will be brought into subjection and will eventually, through the judgments of God which will be poured out, be brought to recognise that Israel's God is the true and living God. And in the mercy of God, brothers and sisters, we have been called upon to be the ambassadors of our Lord Jesus, to go out into the world, to educate the nations as to the way of truth and teach them the right way, and bring them up to Jerusalem to worship God in the temple. So wonderful things lie ahead. We're a very privileged generation to live at the time of the end. And we pray, come quickly, Lord Jesus.